Okay, let's unpack this. We're digging into a stack of sources today, and what really kicked this off is just a truly horrific event.
Yeah, the anti-Semitic Molotov cocktail attack in Boulder, Colorado happened June 1st, 2025.
And the sources, they paint a brutal picture right away. 12 people injured.
8 of them hospitalized with pretty bad burns. And the victims, ages 52 to 88.
Heartbreakingly, sources say one was actually a Holocaust survivor.
Just awful. And, the violence itself is shocking, but as we look through the source material you shared, it's clear there are so many layers here.
Right. It connects to, well, obviously deep-seated anti-Semitism, but also how events overseas can just ignite violence here.
And maybe the most striking part from the source is the really fast and significant immigration consequences, not just for the suspect, but his whole family.
Exactly. So this deep dive, it's not just about the crime. We're trying to pull the threads from these sources.
Understand the context, what happened, how Jewish leaders were seeing the anti-Semitism here based on what we've read.
And then really get into those specific immigration actions, the policy stuff it's stirred up.
So yeah, our mission is to walk you through these different pieces, drawing out the key insights from all this material.
All right, let's start with the attack itself. The sources name the suspect Mohamed Soliman, an Egyptian national. What do the sources say about how he did it and his alleged motives?
Well, the details are disturbing. Sources say Molotov cocktails, even a makeshift flamethrower.
A flamethrower?
Yeah, makeshift. And reports say he was shouting "Free Palestine" during the attack.
And later, didn't he say something specific to detectives?
He did. According to the affidavit mentioned in the sources, he told them he wanted to kill all Zionist people and framed it as revenge, linked to the hostages in Gaza.
Wanted to kill all Zionist people. That's incredibly chilling, especially reading it directly from the source material.
It is.
And was this, spontaneous or planned?
That's another startling detail from the sources. He apparently told authorities he'd been planning this.
Planning it? For how long?
For a year. According to the affidavit, planned for a year and even delayed it.
Delayed it? Why?
For his daughter's high school graduation.
Waiting for his daughter to graduate before carrying out that level of planned violence is just hard to grasp.
It really underscores the calculation involved, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Now, the sources connect this beyond just one man's actions, right? They talk about the broader context of anti-Semitism.
Oh, absolutely. It's not an isolated thing.
Yeah.
The source material emphasizes anti-Semitism is this ancient, adaptable hatred.
Adaptable how?
It often uses scapegoating, blaming Jewish people for problems, pushing conspiracy theories.
What kind of conspiracy theories are mentioned in the sources?
Things like false claims about Jewish control of governments or banks or the media, that kind of stuff.
And the sources mentioned dog whistles.
Yeah, terms like Hollywood elite or cabal, meaning coded language. To people immersed in those theories, it's understood shorthand for Zionists, but used in a way that really means Jewish people generally. It's a way to kind of veil these old anti-Semitic tropes.
That's a really key insight from the sources, how that language taps into older prejudices. And we have perspectives from Jewish leaders in the sources too, right? Reacting to this.
We do. Daniel Rosen, quoted as the president of the American Jewish Congress, he put it quite powerfully.
What did he say?
He's quoted in the sources saying, "What we are seeing now is a tragic war translating into rhetoric, which then leads to violence on American soil, where Jews are being attacked for being Jews, having no role in a war on the other side of the globe."
That quote really hits home. Anger about Israeli government actions tragically spilling over onto Jewish people here who, as he says, have no direct role.
Exactly. And Rabbi Joseph Black from Denver, he's also quoted.
What was his perspective?
He said, "This anger has unfortunately extended beyond the state of Israel to the Jewish people." And he pointed out it's mobbing a vein of anti-Semitism that has been around for centuries.
So reinforcing that this isn't new, just maybe more visible or raw right now.
Right. And Stephanie Clark from Boulder adds another layer.
What did she say?
She noted, according to the sources, that most Jews identify as Zionists, but that doesn't mean backing every Israeli government action. Many are heartbroken about Gaza.
Acknowledging complexity.
Yes. But then she made a very stark point, quoted as saying, "Burning Jews alive on the streets of Boulder is not going to save anybody in Gaza."
A powerful statement, cutting through the complexities to the horror of the act itself.
These voices from the sources, they really convey the pain, the frustration, this old hatred being sort of weaponized in a modern conflict.
And the sources also mention the real-world impact on Jewish communities, like security.
Definitely. Increased security at synagogues, community events, especially since October 7th, 2023. Rabbi Black mentioned the huge cost, the emotional toll of needing armed guards.
So even with measures in place, there's still this ongoing fear.
A significant amount, according to the sources. Fear and trauma are very real.
Okay, so we've covered the attack, the anti-Semitic context laid out in the sources. Let's shift gears now to the immigration side. This was a major development reported. First, Mohamed Soliman himself. What's his immigration story, according to the sources?
Okay, so sources say he entered legally, B2 tourist visa, August 2022.
And then
filed for asylum pretty quickly, September 2022. Now, his B2 visa did expire in 2023.
Right.
And his work permit expired in March 2025.
Mm-hmm.
But crucially, sources note he hadn't actually exhausted all his legal avenues for the asylum claim before the attack happened.
So his status was complicated, pending asylum, but the big news was about his family.
Yes, this is where it gets really striking. According to DHS reports and statements attributed to Secretary Kristi Noem, his wife and their 5 children were taken into IC custody.
When?
June 3rd, 2025. Just 2 days after the attack.
2 days? That seems incredibly fast. Where were they held?
Sources initially said Florence, Colorado. Then there were plans to move them to a facility in Texas, and they were described as facing final expulsion or expedited removal proceedings.
Expedited removal. What was their status when they were detained? Were they here illegally? The sources seem a bit varied on this point.
Yeah, there's some nuance there that needs careful attention. The State Department did confirm revoking the family's visas after the attack.
Okay.
Some sources say they, like Soliman, had entered legally on temporary visas that were then pulled. But then you have a White House post on X calling the suspect an illegal alien and saying the family was facing expedited removal.
So, conflicting signals. One source suggesting they might have been undocumented at that moment, others implying their legal entry status was just revoked.
Exactly, and that term expedited removal itself.
What about it? Based on the sources, what does that usually mean?
Well, background info in the sources explains it's usually a fast-track process. Can allow removal without a full court hearing, but, and this is a key point some sources highlight, it typically doesn't apply to people who entered legally on a visa, like the family reportedly did.
So the term used in official statements might not perfectly match the standard legal process they'd face.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
The White House post even said they could be deported as early as tonight, which sounds very immediate.
But other sources add that deportation usually allows a chance to fight it.
Correct. So there's some tension between the language used and the typical procedures described in the sources.
What else did officials say about detaining the family?
Well, DHS Secretary Noem, as mentioned, is quoted saying they're investigating the family's knowledge. To what extent his family knew, if they had any knowledge, or provided support.
An active investigation.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he was very direct on social media. Sources quote him connecting it to policy.
How so?
Saying, basically, under the Trump administration, we will find you, revoke your visa, and deport you if you're a terrorist, family member, or sympathizer here on a visa.
So, very explicit statements linking the family situation to a broader policy stance on terrorism and immigration enforcement.
Definitely.
Did Soliman himself say if his family knew?
Sources report he told detectives no one knew, including his wife, and his wife was apparently cooperative during the police search, helped find his phone.
That adds another layer to the question of their involvement, based on the sources.
It does.
Okay, stepping back a bit, just generally, how do serious crimes affect immigration status based on the source material?
Sources explain it can be severe. Criminal charges, especially things like CIMTs, crimes involving moral turpitude or aggravated felonies, can trigger ICE detention, removal proceedings.
Loss of benefits.
Yeah, loss of potential benefits like asylum, and ultimately deportation. That's the general legal backdrop here for Soliman, and potentially his family if they had violations or if that investigation finds they supported him.
And this action detaining the family, the potential deportation, while the investigation is ongoing, it sparked a debate, didn't it? Sources mentioned guilt by association.
Oh, absolutely. The sources, including reference comments, really show this tension.
What are the sides?
Well, one perspective, echoing those official statements in some commentary, is that this is a necessary response. Given the terrorism aspect, maybe questions about their own status or asylum link.
Prioritizing security.
Right. One commenter, quoted anonymously in a source, said something like, every civilized country would kick your family out if you committed a terrorist act. That view emphasizes strong measures.
Okay, that's one side presented in the sources, focused on security and consequences for being linked to terrorism as non-citizens. What's the counterargument?
The other side, strongly voiced in the sources, emphasizes individual due process, arguing against punishing the whole family, especially the kids, for one person's actions.
What kind of things were said?
Commenters quoted saying things like, "This isn't North Korea, we don't punish a whole family." And deporting people before any due process is also wrong, pointing to the injustice, particularly for the children, one just having graduated.
So the debate highlighted in the sources is really about that balance. Security and enforcement versus individual responsibility and due process, especially when facts about the family's knowledge and exact status were still emerging or contested in the sources at the time.
Precisely. It's this messy intersection of law, policy, principles, all thrown into the spotlight by this terrible event.
And there was one more immigration policy point mentioned in a source, separate but related.
Yeah, one source touched on reports about the Trump administration possibly considering a regulation change.
What change?
To suspend processing work permits for asylum seekers. Basically, pause everything until applications could be processed within 180 days.
Which the source suggested was unlikely.
Highly unlikely, given the backlog.
Yeah.
And even if lifted, the wait time might double from 6 months to a year.
So another piece of the broader immigration policy discussion happening, according to that source.
Exactly. Not directly tied to Boulder, but part of the context presented in the source material.
Okay, let's try to summarize the key layers we've pulled from the sources in this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We started with this really devastating anti-Semitic attack in Boulder, an act of violence that sources connect to, well, long-standing anti-Semitism, kind of amplified by current global events.
Right. And the attack by Mohamed Soliman led to criminal charges for him, but also these incredibly swift immigration actions against his wife and 5 children.
Taken into IC custody, visas revoked, facing removal.
And those actions, as the sources make really clear, set off a major debate.
About immigration policy, due process, responsibility, this whole difficult idea of guilt by association.
Yeah, it put a spotlight on existing enforcement tools and these very different views on how government should respond to terrorism by a non-citizen, especially regarding family members. And all this while, sources showed, there was still some uncertainty or conflict about the family's exact status and knowledge at that moment.
So thinking about everything we've covered from the sources today, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
How do we, as a society, balance that urgent need for national security, for enforcing immigration laws, with these really fundamental principles of individual responsibility and due process? Especially when one person's terrible actions can have such drastic, life-changing consequences for their family who may or may not have known anything about it.
That clash, security, law, policy, the human cost, it's incredibly complex.
And the sources we looked at today definitely bring that complexity right to the surface.